record.
What makes you think life is so good when you're retired? It's a different game.
If you have lots to do that's meaningful, it is good.
Okay, folks, we are going to get started, and as inevitably happens, a few people will trickle in, but there's so much to cover that we don't have a second to spare, so we're going to use every minute. We're going to pick it up sort of where we left off. That is to say, we're now into the 1890s, and just a before we get started, I like the custom of we're studying, even though this is not rabbinic text per se, it is certainly these are essential texts in Jewish history, and so as such, I feel it is appropriate for us to say the bracha of Lasok b'divrei Torah. And we'll say, of course, Kaddish Rabbanan at the end. I know some might quibble with me on that because, Herzl was definitely not a rabbi, but please recite with me the bracha in case you haven't already recited it today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to God who has given us the framework of mitzvot through which we can fill our lives with holiness, and in particular, the imperative to engage with words of Torah. And as it is clear, as you probably have ascertained, this to me is Torah, and I think for much of the Jewish world, it is Torah as well. So everything that we've covered up until now is a prelude to Herzl. And I'm going to give you a little bio. We're only going to read Herzl today. We've got a selection from the Jewish State, his first. Not quite a novel, but not a novel, but it was a pamphlet, let's say, that was published in 1896. And Herzl is a fascinating character. Okay, so he's born in 1860 in Budapest from a fairly well-off Jewish family. In fact, the house he grows up in, has anyone here been to Budapest?
Yes.
Budapest is a fascinating city for many reasons. I think some of you know that I have that my wife's family was from Budapest. Her mother grew up there. She survived the Holocaust there, and I've been there multiple times to visit with her family. In Budapest, by the way, is the largest synagogue in Europe, and one of the largest in the world. It is it's called the Dohány Templum. The Dohány literally means tobacco. It's the Tobacco Street Synagogue is really how you might translate that. But it's a beautiful synagogue and Herzl actually grew up in a house right next door. There's a little plaque by his house. Just coincidentally, they were not particularly religious. I think I've read sources that say they were affiliated with the Dohány synagogue, but in any case, they weren't particularly traditional. And in fact, Herzl himself, as he grows up, is very shall we say zealously committed to assimilation. He actually believes that assimilation will ameliorate the problems, the challenges of the Jews in Europe of the time. He studies to be an attorney, and he works as an attorney briefly, but in Vienna. Remember, this is the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so it's very easy to go between Hungary and Vienna. They are actually a German-speaking family, so I think German may even be I believe his first language, even though he grows up in Hungary. He works briefly as a lawyer, but he finds that his real love is actually writing, and he actually writes novels and sort of light fiction. He was not a great novelist, but he was a good enough writer that actually he lands a job at some point with the Neue Freie Presse, which is one of the largest circulation newspapers in Europe. It's based in Vienna. And he's one of his roles at that newspaper is he's known as a feuilletonist. Feuilleton is like an addendum to the paper that has like light social commentary, basically, not political. But then he's sent to cover the he's sent to cover the Dreyfus affair in Paris. He becomes the Paris correspondent, and in 1894 he covers the Dreyfus affair. And the Dreyfus affair is a landmark event. Briefly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but what happens in 1894 is that Alfred Dreyfus, who's a colonel in the French army, is accused on trumped up charges of treason. And it was clear that the people that accused him had certain motives, among them anti-Semitism, and it whips up this anti-Semitic fervor in France. Now, of course, there is deep latent anti-Semitism in all over Europe at this time, and so in the process of Dreyfus being kicked out of the army, and they do this big whole public scene where they break his sword in public. They actually had to sort of rig up a special sword that was breakable, because you can't just break a sword over your knee. But it was actually like stitched together, so they could break it. But anyway, so Dreyfus is accused and convicted of treason, and there are crowds of people chanting "Mort aux Juifs," death to the Jews. In public in France at the time, as a result of this trial. And Dreyfus is there, and he sees it, he witnesses it firsthand. And what happens is that he has this sort of awakening. He seems to be prior to that completely unaware of certainly of Judaism per se, but unaware that there's something of a Zionist movement. Maybe he's heard little bits about some other things going on in Palestine, but he doesn't seem to know about that, and he doesn't write about them certainly in his earlier writings. So pretty much overnight, he's convinced there's no future for the Jews in Europe, and that they have to pick themselves up and leave. And to establish a Jewish state. You'll see that in the work that we're going to read, there's a question about whether that should be in Palestine or in Argentina, which is and later he's going to there's something called the Uganda Plan, which is an idea that's floated. But in any case, he as a result of this moment, it's like he's a changed man. And he's feverishly working from that moment forward to trying to create this Jewish state. He establishes what initially is known as the Zionist Organization, later becomes the World Zionist Organization, which still exists. And by the way, in case you didn't know, the World Zionist Congress elections are coming up in March, so you Yins should all vote. But for Merkaz, the party of the conservative movement. But in any case, it's like he's a changed person, and he devotes the next several years of his life feverishly to promoting the Zionist cause. So he shuttles to Istanbul to meet with the Sultan of Turkey, because remember that the Ottoman Turkish Empire they control Palestine at this time. He goes to different European capitals to speak to wealthy Jewish financiers to raise money. And he was not universally beloved by those people. They probably considered him a bit of a gadfly. He does encounter some resistance. But remember, this is early in the Zionist project. And let's not forget, by the way, Zionism is already, the Zionist return to Israel is already in progress, right? Because we've had people coming back. I mean, there are people who live there, throughout history, but Jews who live there throughout history, but also starting in the 1860s, there's a trickle of Jews to Israel. There's the establishment of certain institutions there. And then there's a wave in the 1880s, the first major wave of Aliyah. And then the next major wave is going to happen in 1903, following the Kishinev pogrom. But in any case, in 1897, Herzl convenes the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, and begins this. Yeah.
At that time, what was his definition of Zionism? What did he say to people?
Okay, so we're gonna Bruce asks what was his definition of Zionism. So we're gonna get to his words that start this ball rolling in earnest, because that's what this text is all about. So we're gonna get there. Okay.
Is it still Turkish control at this time?
Yes, through 1917. the Ottoman Turkish Empire controls Palestine until 1917, at which point it becomes British. So he founds the Zionist organization. He convenes the first Zionist Congress. He establishes a Zionist newspaper called Die Welt. He funds it pretty much out of his own pocket. He does this shuttle diplomacy. He's working and working and working for this cause, and he dies of a heart attack in 1904. So he's only 44 years old. It's sort of a tragic story. His children also sort of died tragically. He does not have a happy life. He's buried in what amounts to a pauper's grave in 1904 in Vienna in the Jewish cemetery. And in 1949, after the state of Israel is established, they move him to Jerusalem, to a hill on the outskirts of the city that is today called Har Herzl. Actually, today it's not the outskirts. It's in Jerusalem, Har Herzl, Mount Herzl, which is, by the way, also where the major military cemetery is, and dignitaries are buried there in Israel. If you've been on a mission trip to Israel, you've probably been to Mount Herzl. In any case, and he has a very prominent grave there. So that's sort of Herzl's life in a nutshell. Like I said, a lot of text to cover. I'm putting this once again in the chat for folks online. You should be able to access the Google Doc with our text in it right now if you'd like to follow along as we are reading. So happy you're all joining us online. So just to be so there's our introduction to Herzl. The first page. He opens the Jewish state, the Judenstaat, which is the Judenstaat. That's the name of this pamphlet that he publishes in 1896. The idea which I have developed in this pamphlet is an ancient one. It is the restoration of the Jewish state. The world resounds with clamor against the Jews, and this has revived the dormant idea. So in his introduction, he basically gives you a sense of why he's writing this. We'll read a little bit of the introduction, but we'll get to some of the more important parts inside. He does offer some possible other answers to the Jewish question, and then he eventually explains why this is the one where we have to go with. Can I get a volunteer to read on so the second page? It's actually, it says 208 at the top. At the bottom, he gives us his reason for why he needs to write this particular piece right now, where it says, "To my mind," the bottom page. To another volunteer to read. Yes, Ken, thank you.
To my mind, the electric light was certainly not invented so that the drawing rooms of a few snobs might be illuminated, but rather to enable us to solve some of the problems of humanity by its light. One of the problems, and not the least of them, is the Jewish question. In solving it, we are working not only for ourselves, but also for many other downtrodden and oppressed beings.
Right. Everybody benefits from the light bulb, right? Not just the rich folks who might have paid for the research or whatever. And the same will be true with Zionism. Go on, please.
The Jewish question still exists. It would be foolish to deny it. It is a misplaced piece of medievalism. Which civilized nations do not even yet seem able to shake off, try as they will.
By the way, just to be clear, what is the Jewish question? The question of the future of the Jews in an environment in which they have never been fully recognized as true members of the society in which they live. Go on.
They proved that they had this high-minded desire when they emancipated us. The Jewish question persists wherever Jews live in appreciable numbers. Wherever it does not exist, it is brought in together with Jewish immigrants.
Right, wherever the Jews go, they're going to bring this question with them, says Herzl. Okay.
You're naturally drawn into those places where we are not persecuted, and our appearance there gives rise to persecution. This is the case, and inevitably will be so everywhere, even in highly civilized countries. See, for instance, France, so long as the Jewish question is not solved on a political level. The unfortunate Jews are now carrying the seeds of anti-Semitism into Europe.
Into England.
Already introduced it to America.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-Semitism is a highly complex movement, which I think I understand. I approach this movement as a Jew, yet without fear or hatred. I believe that I can see it in the elements of cruel sport, of common commercial rivalry, of inherited prejudice, of religious intolerance, but also of a supposed need for self-defense. I consider the Jewish question neither a social nor a religious one, even though it sometimes takes those in other forms. It is a national question, and to solve it, we must first of all establish it as an international political problem to be discussed, settled by the civilized nations of the world in council.
Okay, so from the outset, Herzl is setting up this question not as necessarily as an on the ground here in Vienna or in Paris kind of question, but an international question. This is a question that we need to think very high, like on a high level in order to be able to solve the Jewish question. Okay, and then he says, "We are a people, one people." Now, again, you might think, well, duh, right? Yeah, of course we're a people. But maybe that was not necessarily how the Jews thought of themselves this time. What we've seen in some of the readings that we've read from the first reader was the first author we wrote was Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai, who's writing in the 1840s, and he's only speaking from a religious perspective of sort of the traditional understanding of Judaism as being connected to the land through our history. But he's not thinking of people necessarily as a modern nation the way that nations are being formed in the 19th century. So Herzl is clearly invoking that by saying we are a people, we are one people. All right, we're gonna skip a bit. He says down at the bottom, toward the bottom of that page, I think we shall not be left in peace. Okay, and of course, now remember, he's writing a good half century before, well, not even 40 years before the Nazi rise to power. But in some sense, all of these Zionist writers are kind of, I know hindsight is 2020, but they're all referencing this fact that we don't really fit in here, and we don't think that the end is good for us. Despite emancipation, despite having given citizenship in the German lands and in France, we're still not looked upon as being entirely French or German. And when you've got crowds of people chanting death to the Jews in the streets of Paris, that does not bode well for the Jewish future or the answer to the Jewish question. Okay, so let's go on, skip over to page 210. What is one possible answer to the Jewish question? That question is assimilation. Got another volunteer to read. Assimilation. Bobby, all right.
Assimilation, by which I understand not only external conformity in dress habits, customs, and speech, but also identity of attitude and deportment. Assimilation of Jews could be achieved only by intermarriage, but the need for intermarriage would have to be felt by the majority. Mere legislative sanction would never suffice. The Hungarian liberals who have just legalized intermarriage have placed themselves in a thoroughly false position. The doctrinaire character of this legislation is well illustrated by one of the earliest cases. It was a baptized Jew who married a Jewess. At the same time, the conflict which arose in the course of enacting the new form of marriage has aggravated the difference between Jews and Christians in Hungary, thus hindering rather than furthering the amalgamation of the great races.
So what he's saying here, of course, is that even though intermarriage is now acceptable in some places in Europe, marriage between Jews and Christians, which, by the way, didn't happen historically, right? If you were a Jew and you wanted to marry a Christian, you had to convert to Christianity, right? Or maybe the other way, I suppose, although that was probably very unlikely. He says that this situation is actually only exacerbating the tension here between Jews and Christians. Okay. Those who really wish to see the Jews disappear through interbreeding can hope to see it come about in one way only. The Jews must first rise so far in the economic scale that old social prejudices against them would be overcome. So, in other words, intermarriage isn't enough. Ultimately, the Jews have to be sort of on an economic par with everybody else in order for them to be accepted. And of course, that's not so easy. How do you engineer that? He says.
Rabbi,
Yes.
second,
Yes.
there will be a fire alarm bells going off at 12:45. You don't have to move. You don't have to go anywhere. And inspectors here, they just have to see that the bells and the alarms are working. I just wanted you to be aware of that. And we'll have to do a bigger room.
That-
This is great.
Thank you. In case you all didn't hear, that's our executive director Robert Gleiberman telling us that the fire alarm is going to go off. Is that there's a drill? But we're not. Yeah, but
You'll have to be patient for a few seconds as they're testing the message.
they're testing the fire alarm bells at 12:45. Yeah, why don't you close the door for us? Thank you. Okay, it's going to be recorded on Zoom for all eternity. The video. Okay, get your earplugs ready. Okay, thank you for that warning. So he says again, there's this problem of the economic disparity between Jews and non-Jews. The Jews in Europe are living in very bad circumstances. And by the way, in addressing this Jewish question, some of the wealthier Jews have actually managed to assimilate quite nicely into European society. The wealthier you were at that time, the easier it was for you to mix with your non-Jewish neighbors. And he says in the middle of 211, I shall probably be opposed and rejected by Jews who are in comfortable circumstances. That is to say, the wealthier Jews are doing just fine in Europe. They don't need to leave. And they're not going to necessarily like this idea of, sure, let's pick up and move to Palestine. We like living here in Vienna. Life is good for some of us. So, okay. Another volunteer to read a little further down on 211 among the objections to Zionism. Yeah, go ahead, Sabina.
More serious objection would be that I am giving aid and comfort to the anti-Semites when I say we are a people, one people, or that I am hindering the assimilation of Jews where there are hopes of achieving it and endangering it where it is already an accomplished fact, insofar as it is possible for a solitary writer to hinder or endanger any.
Right. Here I am. People don't like it when people come when others come along and say, "Hey, the Jews are actually not Germans. Let's pick up and move somewhere else." People might get a little upset about that. Keep going, please.
This objection will be brought forward, especially in France. It will probably also be made in other countries, but I shall first answer only the French Jews who afford the most striking example of my point. However much I may esteem personality, powerful individual personality in statesmen, inventors, artists, philosophers, or leaders, as well as the collective personality of a historic group of human beings, which we designate nation. However much I may esteem personality, I do not mourn its decline. Whoever can, will, and must perish, let him perish. But the distinctive nationality of the Jews neither can, will, nor must perish. It cannot, because external enemies consolidate it. It does not wish to. This has been proved through 2 millennia.
Right on page 212 of appalling.
I'm trying to find this.
Yeah. 2 millennia of appalling suffering.
Suffering. It need not. That, as is a descendant of countless Jews who refuse to despair, I am trying once more to prove in this pamphlet. Whole branches of Jewry may wither and fall away. The tree lives on.
Okay, so what he's talking about here is that the nation, the Jewish nation has endured many sort of the rise and fall of many different sub movements within it. He might be putting a little dig into the reform movement here. I'm not sure. Certainly, Moses Hess, who was the author that we talked about in the first session, and I quoted in my sermon on Shabbat. He hated the reform movement because they wanted to be German nationalists and not Jewish nationalists. But Herzl says, you know what? We've been around for a long time. The trunk of this tree is strong and is going to continue. And hence the power of the Jewish nationhood. Keep going a little more, please.
Hence, if any or all of French Jewry protest against this scheme because they are already assimilated, my answer is simple. The whole thing does not concern them at all. They are Israelitic Frenchmen. Splendid. This is a private affair for Jews alone.
Right, Israelitic Frenchmen, French Jews. Like that. I guess maybe some of them were trying to refer to themselves as Israelitic sometimes they use the word like not Hebraist, but of the Hebrew persuasion. My co-religionists try to avoid the term Jew because it carried negative connotations. But okay, so some assimilated folks are trying to fit in with the French. Right, fine. However, go on.
However, the movement for the creation of the state, which I here propose, would harm Israelitic Frenchmen no more than it would harm those who have assimilated in other countries. It would rather be distinctly to their advantage, for they would no longer be disturbed in their chromatic function, as Darwin puts it, but would be able to assimilate in peace, because present-day anti-Semitism would have been stopped for all time. For it would certainly be believed that they are assimilated to the very depths of their being if they remained in their old homes, even after the new Jewish state with its superior institutions had become a reality.
I think what he's saying here is that some Jews might not get with this program of picking up and moving to Israel, and as we know, that's exactly what happened, right? Historically speaking, actually today Israel has the largest concentration of Jews in the world. Okay, about 7.5 million Jews in Israel, and that accounts for somewhere close to half of world Jewry. Second largest community, of course, is in the United States. But yes, there continue to be Jews throughout the world, even though we as a nation, Herzl thinks, but we belong together. Nonetheless, some of us will stay in place in Europe, elsewhere. And some of us will move to the new Jewish state.
Now, this is written in German.
Yes, he writes in German.
Did Hitler read it?
I have no way of knowing that. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know what Hitler's opinions on Zionism were. He certainly had some opinions on anti-Semitism. That is, he was for it. Let's just a few brief questions here that people asked online. I don't know about Maddie asks, I don't know about his background context. Is he writing with the context of the pogroms? Yes, Maddie, just to be clear, throughout this period, particularly in Eastern Europe, there's anti-Semitic agitation in the forms of pogroms. I mean, that's not new in the 19th century, but the Tsar stepped up in the latter half of the 19th century, sort of steps up anti-Jewish activity in the Pale of Settlement. So those Jews are subject to that. The kind of anti-Semitism that Herzl is talking about is not necessarily pogroms, but it is certainly the sort of the more subtle anti-Semitism. Well, subtle except for the mobs chanting "Death to the Jews" in the streets of Paris around the Dreyfus affair. But general, the more general, "Oh, you're not one of us" kind of anti-Semitism that's going on in Europe. Audrey asks, did anyone ask whether we were dispersed among the nations to educate others or for some other purpose, or was the view always inwards? Well, okay. Thank you, Audrey, for referencing the fact that we consider ourselves or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. Yes, I mean, I think that there's certainly a case to be made historically that it's a good thing for the Jews to be dispersed amongst the people of the nation, peoples of the world. However, Herzl is thinking for self-protection would be better for us ultimately if we have our own land. Israel can still be a light to the nations, even in Israel, you might say. It's already, I can't believe how fast the time is flying, so we got to move faster. Middle of page 213, no human being is wealthy or powerful enough to transplant a people from one place of residence to another. Only an idea can achieve that. Herzl is a powerful motivator of people. His words really actually inspire all this activity at the end of the 19th century that really brings about ultimately the state of Israel half a century later. The Jews have dreamed, the state idea surely has that power. The Jews have dreamed this princely dream throughout the long night of their history. Next year in Jerusalem, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, which we say at the end of Rosh Hashanah and also the end of Yom Kippur, also at the end of Pesach Seder. That is our age-old motto. It is. Herzl did know at least something about Judaism, by the way. So it is now a matter of showing that the vague dream can be transformed into a clear and glowing idea. Some of us who went to a Jewish summer camp might remember the popular tune we used to sing, Im tirtzu, Im tirtzu, Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. says Herzl. That's a quote from his elsewhere. It's not exactly this. Go over to page 215. Let's talk about the Jewish question. Another volunteer to read. Okay, Arita, please.
No one can deny the gravity of the human. Wherever they live in a appreciable number, Jews persecuted in greater or lesser measure. Their equality before the law granted by statute has become practically a dead letter. They are debarred from filling even moderately high offices in the army or in any public or private institution. And attempts are being made to thrust them out of business also. Don't buy from Jews.
Right. So again, it's like real discrimination going on throughout the society in which they live. Go on, please.
Tax and parliament, assembly, in the press, in the pulpit, in the street, on journeys, for example, their exclusion from certain hotels, even in places of recreation, are increasing from day to day. The forms of persecution vary according to the country and social circle. In Russia, special taxes are levied on Jewish villages. In Romania, a few persons are put to death. In Germany, they get a good beating occasionally. In Austria, anti-Semites exercise their terrorism over all public life. In Algeria, there are traveling agitators. In Paris, the Jews are shut out of the so-called best social circle and excluded from clubs.
Okay, so basically, he's giving lots of examples of the ways that anti-Semitism plays out in European society. Jump down to "I do not aim," please, and keep going. Oh.
Expression. Oh, go to I do.
Hmm.
I do not aim to arouse sympathy on our behalf. All that is nonsense, as futile as it is divine. I will content myself with putting the following questions to the Jews. Is it not true that in countries where we live in appreciable numbers, technicians, teachers, and employees of every description becomes daily more intolerable? Is it not true that the Jewish middle classes are seriously threatened? Is it not true that the passions of the mob are incited against our wealthy? Is it not true that our poor endure greater suffering than any proletariat? I think that this pressure is everywhere present. In our upper economic classes, it causes discomfort. In our middle classes, utter despair. The fact of the matter is, everything tends to one and the same conclusion, which is expressed in the classic Berlin film, Human Rights, out the issue.
Now read just a little another sentence.
I should now put the question in the briefest possible form. Shouldn't we get out at one? And if so, when?
Right, or may we remain, and if so, how long? He asks. So, right, given all that we've just read, his detailing of the discrimination that happens in European society, he has to ask the legitimate question: which is it not time to leave? Is it not time to leave? Flip over to page 218. Actually, you know what? In the interest of time, well, I guess we're doing all right. Let's read a little bit about his theories about the causes of anti-Semitism. Page 218, where it says the main current of Jew hatred. Another volunteer to read.
Main current of Jew hatred is today a different one. In the principal centers of anti-Semitism, it is an outgrowth of emancipation of the Jews. When civilized nations awoke to the inhumanity of discriminatory legislation and enfranchised us, our enfranchisement came too late. Legislation alone no longer suffices to emancipate us in our homes. For in the ghetto, we have remarkably developed into a bourgeois people, and we emerged from the ghetto a prodigious rival to the middle class. Thus, we found ourselves thrust upon emancipation into this bourgeois circle where we have a double pressure to sustain from within and from without. The Christian bourgeois would indeed not be loath to cast us as a peace offering to socialism, little though that would avail them.
Just a little more.
At the same time, the equal rights of Jews before the law cannot be rescinded where they have once been granted.
Right. So what's going on here is that he's saying that despite emancipation, anti-Semitism has persisted. The Jews had hoped, and we've actually seen this before in some of the writings of the earlier folks, that emancipation, the Jews hoped would bring them some relief, and it did not. And by the way, they're not going to go, the non-Jewish authorities, the German authorities, are not going to go back and unemancipate the Jews. I mean, he might even make the case here. He's not, but he's making the case that perhaps the situation might have been better before emancipation, because now this bourgeois class is here competing with the Christian professionals, and that just creates friction. I mean, it's horrible, but of course, what's the solution? That's not going to change. Skipping down on 219 into the middle of that paragraph, the very impossibility of getting at the Jews nourishes and deepens hatred of them. Anti-Semitism increases day by day and hour by hour among the nations. Indeed, it is bound to increase because the causes of its growth continue to exist and are ineradicable. Its remote cause is the loss of our assimilability during the Middle Ages. Its immediate cause is our excessive production of mediocre intellectuals. He's criticizing his own people here, right? Who have no outlet downward or upward, or rather no wholesome outlet in either direction. When we sink, we become a revolutionary proletariat, the corporals of every revolutionary party. When we rise, there rises also our terrifying financial power. So the Jews are a threat for various reasons, and so let's talk about the next possible response. Go over to page 220. Somebody read his. Get another volunteer to read his at the top there on 220. Though perhaps regarding assimilation. Could assimilation actually solve the problem? Another volunteer. Mindy. Okay, go ahead.
Succeed in banishing without a trace surrounding peoples if they would let us be for just 2 generations. They will not let us be. After brief periods of toleration, their hostility erupts again and again.
Right, and this is something, again, I mentioned this in the sermon on Shabbat. This is what we've seen. This is a pattern, right? Wherever the Jews have some kind of success and flourish for some time, eventually the anti-Semites start to rise up against them and bad things happen. I think of the example, by the way, I did not mention this on Shabbat, but the example of I was in Spain a couple of years ago, and in Toledo, which was a fantastic center of Jewish life in the 12th and 13th centuries. And in the 13th century, there's a wealthy financier who's like he's the treasurer for the local king, and he builds this beautiful synagogue, which is still standing in Toledo. For many years after the expulsion from Spain in 1492, it served as a church and been various other buildings. It's now a museum. But it's built. I don't have the dates right, but it's sorry, did I say 13th century? I think it's actually 14th century. This wealthy financier builds it. It's named after him, and then 3 years later, he's actually executed by the king. Because the king was done with him. The economy was doing well. He didn't need his Jewish treasurer anymore. He was done. And that is a pattern throughout history. I mean, they're not always as dramatic as that, but that's sort of a very stark example of how history has treated the Jews. Mindy, please keep going.
When we prosper, it seems to be unbearably irritating, for the world has for many centuries been accustomed to regarding us as the most degraded of the poor. Thus, out of ignorance or ill will, they have failed to observe that prosperity weakens us as Jews and wipes away our differences. Only pressure drives us back to our own. Only hostility stamps us ever again as strangers. Thus, we are now and shall remain, whether we would or not, a group of unmistakable potency. We are one people. Our enemies have made us one, whether we will or not, as has repeatedly happened in history.
I think that's actually a fascinating observation. Who made us a people? The people that hate us, our enemies. If anti-Semitism didn't exist, there would be no need for Jewish nationhood. There would be no need for Zionism. Again, Fascinating material. So here's the plan. Okay, so he proposes. Okay, assimilation isn't going to work for those reasons. Okay, it hasn't worked throughout history. It's never going to work. What he says is that, that we need to create a state, and there are two organizations that need to be created in order to create this state. He talks about the Society of Jews and the Jewish Company. Okay, can I get somebody else to read about this? Next volunteer. Okay, go ahead. Right. Sorry, on page 220, where it says the plan.
Plan simply designed but complicated in execution will be executed by two agencies, the Society of Jews and the Jewish Company. The scientific plan and political policies which the Society of Jews will establish will be carried out by the Jewish Company. The Jewish Company will be the liquidating agent for the business interests of departing Jews and will organize trade and commerce in the new country. We must not visualize the exodus of the Jews as a sudden one. It will be gradual, proceeding over a period of decades. The poorest will go first and cultivate the soil.
I think, by the way, Pinsker, I think it was Pinsker who said something similar. Basically, he had a sort of stages for how to for his vision of auto emancipation. Go on.
They will construct roads, bridges, railways, and telegraph installations, regulate rivers, and provide themselves with homes.
All those rivers in Israel, by the way. Sorry. He's not necessarily talking. Remember, he's not necessarily talking exclusively about Palestine. He might be talking about Argentina. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's go back and provide themselves with homesteads, all according to predetermined plans. Their labor will create trade. Trade will create markets, and markets will attract new settlers. For every man will go voluntarily at his own expense and his own risk. The labor invested in this soil will enhance its value. Jews will soon perceive that a new and permanent frontier has been opened up for that spirit of enterprise, which has heretofore been brought them only hatred and
obloquy. So it's worth noting, by the way, he takes note of this entrepreneurial spirit of the Jews. And if anyone's been in Israel, you know that that's like a real thing in Israeli society. Israel is a very entrepreneurial society, and it's interesting that Herzl sees this in 1896 amongst the Jewish population there. Perhaps by this, again, I'm certainly not an expert in this sort of like in this aspect of Jewish history, perhaps because of the nature of the relationship between Jew and non-Jew in Europe, that necessitated an entrepreneurial spirit, because you had to find a way to work in the society that was not friendly to you. In Israel, it was in the building of Palestine, or building in Palestine, and then which became the state of Israel. That necessitated an entrepreneurial spirit, because there was no infrastructure, there was no economy. You had to like think of a way to make money. And that continues to this day. You really see this. You continue to see this in Israeli society. Let's see. Let's talk about the society. If you go down the page to the bottom, page 221, who would go with us? Another volunteer to read. Okay, Barry, go ahead. Bottom of the page.
Who would go with us? Let them fall in behind our banner and fight for the cause with color and deed. Those Jews who agree with our state idea will rally around the society. Thereby, they will give it the authority in the eyes of government to confer and treat on behalf of our people. The society.
222 will be recognized as.
Society will be recognized as put in terminology of international law. A state creating power, and that recognition will in effect mean the creation of the state. Should the powers show themselves willing to grant us sovereignty over a neutral land, then the society will enter in negotiations for the possession of this land. Here two regions come to mind: Palestine and Argentina. Significant experiments in colonization have been infiltration of Jews.
Have been made in both countries.
Infiltration is bound to end badly. For those comes the inevitable moment when the government in question, under pressure of the native populace, which feels itself threatened, puts a stop to further influx of Jews.
Okay, hold on a second. So let me just be clear what he's saying there. So infiltration, I know that sounds like a negative word. He's just talking about people moving there and setting up shop, like and creating some kind of like a covert, gaining a foothold not through official means, but just by moving. And what he's going to say is, if you see a little further down, the Society of Jews will treat with the present authorities in the land under the sponsorship of the European powers if they prove friendly to the plan. The idea is that we have to be talking to governments. We have to be talking to governments to make this possible, not merely by moving to Israel, buying a little piece of, or Argentina, buying a piece of land and starting to work it. But rather, we have to negotiate with the powers that be to try to build this. We're going to skip a bit. Let's go to his conclusion on page 225, because I also want to take just a little look at his remarks to the First Zionist Congress. Oh, there's that. Hold on. Okay. The alarm's going off as promised. So any questions at this point before we get back to the text? Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. Yeah, go ahead.
Nothing has been mentioned about religion.
Right.
So this is pure business.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Bruce's question, for those who didn't hear it, is that he has not mentioned religion, but this is just business. He's just talking about business. And I think that Herzl's response to that was, well, look, we've got all sorts of Jews. We have secular Jews, we have religious Jews, we've got a sort of a range in between. This is for everybody. We are a people that crosses a wide palette of connection to the historical observance of Judaism, and we want to make sure that we're appealing to all of those people. And so he's not limiting himself. There are other Zionist writers, and we'll actually encounter some of them in our next time, who actually speak both about religion and about secularism. But Herzl, he doesn't really get into that. It's an interesting observation. Other questions before we Barry, yeah.
When he observed, is he Orthodox?
No, Herzl was not in any way Orthodox. His family was identified with what still today exists only in Hungary, called the Neolog movement. The Neolog movement is the closest analog to what we call the conservative movement here, or Masorti Judaism worldwide. But it was a distinctly Hungarian movement that was liberal. And as I mentioned, he lived right next door to the major liberal congregation, the major Neolog congregation, which was the Dohányi Temple in central Budapest. But yes, he was not. I believe in reading about him, his grandparents had come from observant families. Hungary at this time, Hungarian Jews in the late 19th century are undergoing this process of assimilation, and Herzl is swept up in that. So he's pretty much entirely secular, but he has some knowledge of Judaism, but just not very much. Certainly not practicing. I'm going to turn over to 225. I'm going to read here as he sort of wraps this all up. Here you have it, Jews, not fiction nor yet fraud. Every man may convince himself of it, for every man will carry over with him a portion of the promised land, one in his head, another in his arms, another in his acquired possessions. Now, all this may appear to be a drawn-out affair. Even in the most favorable circumstances, many years might elapse before the founding of the state is underway. Of course, he was not wrong about that. In the meantime, Jews in 1,000 different places will suffer insult, mortification, abuse, drubbings, depredation, and death. But no, once we begin to execute the plan, anti-Semitism will cease at once and everywhere. So you might say I put a little question mark there on the side, because that's a pretty bold statement. Like, why is this establishment of the Jewish nation going to put an end to anti-Semitism? As we know, here he was entirely wrong, right? We know that we live in a world in which anti-Semitism is very present, but I guess he thought that in creating this Jewish state and ultimately beginning to take the Jews out of the anti-Semitic environments from which they are coming, that will sort of lessen this pressure, this friction that's happening where he is, even amongst the secular Jews. For it is the conclusion of peace, he says. when the Jewish company has been formed, the news will be carried in a single day to the utmost ends of the globe by the lightning speed of our telegraph wires, and immediately relief will ensue. The intellectuals whom we produce so superabundantly in our middle classes will find an immediate outlet in our organization as our first technicians, officers, professors, officials, lawyers, physicians, and so it will continue swiftly but smoothly. Prayers will be offered up in the temples for the success of the project. We still do this, of course, right? And in the churches as well. I mean, again, pretty bold vision. It is the relief from the old burden under which all have suffered. But first, the minds must be enlightened. The idea must make its way into the uttermost miserable holes where our people dwell. They will awaken from barren brooding, for into all our lives will come a new meaning. Every man need think only of himself, and the movement will become an overwhelming one. And what glory awaits the selfless fighters for the cause? Therefore, I believe that a wondrous breed of Jews will spring up from the earth. The Maccabees will rise again. Zionists love the image of the Maccabees because they fought back against the assimilated, the Hellenized Syrians who had taken Israel in the second century BCE. Let me repeat once more my opening words: the Jew who will it. The Jews who will it shall achieve their state. Im tirtzu ein zo agada, if you will it, it is no dream. We shall live at last as free men on our own soil, in our own homes, peacefully die, etc., etc. Okay, so bold words from Herzl, but they launched this movement. So within the next year, he puts together the first Zionist Congress. I'm going to flip over to that actually. Reading a little on page 227. So this is his address, August 29th, 1897, in Basel, Switzerland. Since time immemorial, the world has been misinformed about us. The sentiment of solidarity with which we have been reproached so frequently and so acrimoniously was in process of disintegration at the very time we were being attacked by anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism served to strengthen it anew. We returned home, as it were, for Zionism is a return to the Jewish fold even before it becomes a return to the Jewish land. He's talking about, shall we say, spiritual emancipation, and which will ultimately lead to the physical building of the state. We, the children who have returned, find much to redress under the ancestral roof, for some of our brothers have sunk deep into misery. We are made welcome in the ancient house, for it is universally known that we are not actuated by an arrogant desire to undermine that which should be revered. This will clearly be demonstrated by the Zionist platform. By the way, to Barry's question about Judaism, in the next line there, Zionism has already brought about something remarkable, heretofore regarded as impossible, a close union between the ultra-modern and the ultra-conservative elements of Jewry. So he's aware of the fact that there is this range of what it means to be Jewish, even in Europe in 1897, and that this is an idea which has inspired many across the board. Now, we might look at the contemporary world and say that maybe it didn't quite exactly pan out this way. Even at this time, of course, you remember that the Reform movement actually does not officially embrace Zionism until 1948, I believe. There's a story I might have told. Forgive me if you've heard this one before, but when the State of Israel was established in 1948, the conservative movement was at least nominally Zionist from its inception. In 1948 at the ordination ceremony of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I have this on authority by somebody who was there. Okay, so one of my congregants a long time ago was Rabbi Mordechai Chertoff, alav shalom. He's no longer with us, but he was there at the ordination ceremony in 1948, which was just a week or two after the State of Israel had been declared. And they asked the students, the graduated, the ordained class of rabbis, or about to be ordained class of rabbis, asked, "Can we play Hatikva at the ordination ceremony?" And the administration said, "So sorry, no time. We've already got, the ceremony is like tight. It's tight. We got to get it." So what did they do? They went to find the carillon player at the Riverside Church, which is a block away, and asked them to play Hatikva during the ceremony. And then, since they were out in the courtyard of JTS, they could actually hear the carillon player Hatikva, and they stopped the ceremony to listen, maybe sing along. So okay, but in any case, there was a range of reactions to this. However, it is an idea which is igniting the imaginations of many, if not all. Down the page on 227, a popular movement of such vast dimension will necessarily be attacked from many sides. Therefore, this Congress, the World Zionist Congress, will concern itself with the spiritual means to be employed for reviving and fostering the national consciousness of the Jews. Here, too, we must struggle against misconceptions. We have not the least intention of yielding a jot of the culture we have acquired. On the contrary, we are aiming toward a broader culture, such as an increase of knowledge brings with it. As a matter of fact, the Jews have always been more active mentally than physically. That's not necessarily a diss of the dearth of Jewish soccer players. Let's say it's just saying that we the Jews have always been inspired by a range of learning. And by the way, I think we'll see this more next time, which our next meeting is in 4 weeks on March 4th at noon, Tuesday, March 4th. And we'll be reading Achad Ha'am and Berdichevsky, two writers who are around the same time and disagree with each other, but they're both writing about cultural Zionism, and in particular, what Herzl is saying here is that the culture of this Jewish state need not be explicitly Jewish in the traditional sense, but rather that it should be a place where, as is true today, there are secular universities which study secular subjects, by the way, with much success. So again, his vision is not just about the nuts and bolts, as Bruce pointed out, sort of the economic approach to how to the business of making this happen, but also to some extent he's thinking a little bit about the culture of this new Jewish state. This is not an area in which he spends a lot of time talking, but in any case, it is important to him. I'll tell you what, maybe read the last little bit. Let's skip over to the last page 230. So this is the conclusion of the speech. In the coming hour, the news of our deliberations and decisions will fly to distant lands over the 7 seas. Therefore, enlightenment and comfort should go forth from this Congress. Let everyone find out what Zionism really is. Zionism, which was rumored to be a sort of millennial marvel, that it is a moral, lawful, humanitarian movement directed toward the long yearned for goal of our people. It was possible and permissible to ignore the spoken or written utterances of individuals within our ranks. Not so with the actions of the Congress. Thus, the Congress, which is henceforth to be ruler of its discussions, must govern as a wise ruler. Finally, the Congress will provide for its own continuance, so that we do not disperse once more ineffectual and ephemeral. Again, he's sort of taking a dig at previous Zionist efforts. This is big, he says. This is so big that it's going to capture the attention of the world, and that we now have the power to actually move this project forward because we have a body that can actually function and create this Jewish state. I think I lost where I was. Once more effectual and ephemeral. Through this Congress, we are creating an agency for the Jewish people, such as it has not possessed heretofore, an agency of which it has stood in urgent need. Our cause is too great to be left to the ambition or the whim of individuals. It must be elevated to the realm of the impersonal if it is to succeed. And our Congress, and by impersonal, he means not individuals. It has to be collective. It has to be a large movement. And our Congress shall live forever, not only until the redemption from age-long suffering is effected, but afterward as well. Today we are here. This is actually also kind of a reference to L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim. Today we are here in the hospitable limits of this free city. Where shall we be next year? But wherever we shall be, and however distant the accomplishment of our task, let our Congress be earnest and high-minded, a source of welfare to the unhappy, of defiance to none, of honor to all Jewry. Let it be worthy of our past, the renown of which, though remote, is eternal. And it wasn't perhaps as remote as he might have thought. Remember, he dies about 7 years after writing and delivering those words. But it's only 50 years later, effectively, that the partition plan happens, is granted by the United Nations, and in the spring of 1948, when the State of Israel is established. One question, then we're going to say Kaddish Rabbanan. Yes, go ahead, Barry.
The Jewish National Fund
Yes.
came when?
The Jewish National
They
Fund.
own the land.
The Jewish National Fund is basically one of the organizations that he's talking about. That is the company. When he talks about the company, that's what he's referring to. Is sort of like that would help manage this whole a project of settling Jews in Israel and establishing agricultural collectives and so forth. And yes, the initial project, of course, was to purchase land and settle people there agriculturally. Okay, let's go to Kaddish Rabbanan, which is on page 111. Thank you all for joining us. Like I said, the next session is March 4th. More interesting material than page 111. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Ravam v'alama dibra kirute v'yamlich malchute v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedechol Beit Yisrael ba'gala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei Ravam v'barach le'alam u'lalamei alamayam. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemer kudsha brechum le'ella min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alama v'imru amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Tamidei Hon ve'al kol Talmidei Hon ve'al kol man de'asakin be'oraita di ve'atra haden ve'di ve'chol atar v'atar Yehe lahon ulchon shalama rabba china v'chisda v'rachamin v'chayin arichin umzona revicha ufurkana min kodam avon nivishmaya v'imru amen. Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'roav u'brachamav yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Thank you all as usual for spending some time learning with me and reading these great old texts. Next meeting, March 4th, we'll cover Chadam and Berdichevsky. See you, and maybe some others if we have time. See you all then. Take care. Thank you for joining us online. See you soon.
Thanks, Rabbi. I call you back in a minute.
Okay. Auch dir.